After 93 hours, I've finally done it. I've finally finished Baldur's Gate 3, and wow, what a journey it has been. A journey that I started all the way in January with the unboxing of the deluxe edition on PS5. Obviously, we had a massive ordeal to even get it here into South Africa. Thankfully, my father was able to bring it over from Germany, and I've had the pleasure of owning it physically, which is something that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to do in South Africa. But I went through all this effort to purchase this game physically. How does it actually play? Was it worth the money? Was it worth the wait? Was it worth me waiting so long to get a physical copy and just playing it outright? I can say after the 93 hours that I've made or put into this game that it truly is a spectacular game. But what are my specific thoughts on Baldur's Gate 3? Well, luckily for you guys and luckily for me, I had to write them down, because if it wasn't for me writing them down and organizing my thoughts, just like in the game, we would be on a completely different tangent every 5 minutes. And that is the first thing that I actually want to talk about with Baldur's Gate 3. Right from the get-go, right from designing your character, you can have so many choices and it almost seems overwhelming. But if you take your time and you maybe even go watch some guide videos, you start to realize that it isn't actually as daunting as it initially was or initially seemed, especially in the first two acts. We'll get to Act 3 in just a second, but I just want to cover those first two acts quickly. Acts 1 and 2 do a great job of setting up the story, and it's a much more linear experience where, yes, you can go on a few tangents. It's nothing compared to what happens in Act 3. So Acts 1 and 2 took me about 15 to 20 hours each, and they were a great time. But when you hit that 40-hour mark, or around about there for when I was finishing Act 2, you kind of feel like, gosh, how can this carry on for another few hours? And well, for me, after the 40-hour mark, it still carried on for 50 hours in Act 3. Now, I will admit that it was a lot of save scumming. So for your initial playthrough, don't feel bad about doing this. I was never going to be someone that was going to be able to just run and gun through everything. It was such a big learning curve for me that I needed that safety net of having saves pretty much every 5 seconds. And then when I didn't do the safety nets of having saves for every 5 seconds, I lost a couple hours of gameplay, which is why my final save file says something around 72 hours. But if you look at my PlayStation save here at the corner here, it says 93, and that 93 is definitely more correct, because your save data doesn't calculate on the game the amount of time that you've lost when you go back to a save file. So say you play for 2-3 hours and you die and you have to go back because you didn't save more recently, then you lose those 2 hours of save time, if that makes sense. So while my save file at the end says around 70 something hours, it's definitely the 93 hours. The 93 hours is the much more applicable amount of time. So based off of that, you can definitely say that I spent about 50 something hours in Act 3 alone. So Act 3 alone makes up a massive chunk of the game. When you first arrive into Act 3, it's super daunting. It almost feels like everything is laid out in front of you and you don't know which path to choose. And sometimes choosing one path and then trying to go to another means that the influences of a specific pathway has almost cut off another pathway. It is incredibly complex, and while this is not a spoiler-free video, I'm trying my best to almost not spoil, but I think that's going to go out the window. So at the end, you have 2 bosses left. You have to figure out which one you want to almost go towards first and which one might be easier for you. So for example, I went to Gortash and I disabled his Steel Watch, and I went and defeated Gortash first, and then I went into Orin, and Orin was a completely different story. I did the Orin fight about 3 or 4 times. It took me about an hour and a half each time, and eventually I was like, there's got to be an easier way to do it. And I'm pretty sure I have some gameplay of it, so let me just show you what I figured out.
Perhaps the tale of my first kill? A mason, kind and encouraging, took me for an... I stripped the flesh from his bones. That's it. No noise. Quiet as the grave you'll rot.
So yeah, I just cheesed my way through this fight. I yeeted Orin directly off, and then I sorted out her little army by myself. That was so much easier while she wasn't involved, because that boon of Baal is just, it was insane. I could not get through it. It was something that just kept bugging me, and I'm pretty sure if I had more optimized parties, if I had spent more time learning how to create the best version of my character. So for example, I only played Paladin, and I know a lot of people say that multi-classing for Paladin is probably the best way to go, and I completely understand why that might be the case. I just went outright Paladin, didn't multi-class, didn't do anything like that. However, that was probably a mistake on my part, and I don't think this is going to be the last time I ever play Baldur's Gate 3. Let's be realistic, this game has so many different ways of playing it that one playthrough is never going to be enough. It is enough for me now, but maybe at the end of the year or closer to next year, I will look at doing another playthrough with a more unique character, because I kind of kept this character pretty plain and pretty boring. So it was great to get me through the story, and while I did enjoy everything about him, it's actually the companions. The companions make this game. The main story, even, like, it was a good fantasy story, maybe like an 8 out of 10, but it's those character stories, those companion stories that kept me engaged. So for example, I just wanted to finish Shadowheart, Karlach, and Will's story, and those are the 3 stories that I was kind of focused on. That's what I wanted to get done, while the rest of the story was obviously engaging, and I eventually completed that with the whole Netherbrain and Elderbrain and the Absolute and everything going on. There's so much to follow. It was great, but it was those companion stories that really kept me coming back, and it was those stories that I thoroughly loved and thoroughly enjoyed. Also, for the Shadowheart one, also found a way to cheese that whole end fight. If you are struggling, there are ways to make it a little bit easier on yourself. Let me put it like that. There are ways to cheese your ways through a majority of these fights. But with that said, like I mentioned earlier, the Act 3 just seems a little bit overwhelming. What you do need to do is just start with one of the smaller checkpoints, get them out of the way, and once you start ticking off all the different checkpoints and you start opening up the city of Baldur's Gate, it becomes a lot more clearer what needs to be done, and everything starts falling into place almost perfectly. And I didn't realize how perfectly everything fell into place until right at the end, and that is the beautiful part of the story. When you get right to the end, everything comes together and ties all your choices together in such a beautiful way that you never actually expected to happen, because there's so many different things happening in this story that for the developers to think of all these different story paths and tie them together as beautifully as they did right at the end is just incredible. The only other game that's similar to this is, I remember playing The Witcher 3 back in the day, and having more recently in 2020, or oh geez, I say that's recently, 2022, sorry, replaying it and doing a different story path. That also has so many multiple endings, but I think Baldur's Gate 3 definitely takes the cake. I think this has way more endings and way more possibilities for how the ending encloses and comes to a conclusion, because there's so many different characters that you need to talk to, and maybe you didn't talk to this character, but you spoke to this character and finished this character's story path, and that plays a role in how the game ends at the very, very end. It's just a magical thing that to see come together, and it's something that I thoroughly loved. Now let's talk about that gameplay. For anyone that doesn't like turn-based gameplay, this is going to be a major slogfest, because it is slow, it is incredibly tactical, it is very well crafted, and is very well placed in that Dungeons and Dragons gameplay style. Now, I have no experience playing the tabletop game Dungeons and Dragons. However, after playing this game, I can see how it is so set in that world. There is always underlying rollings of dice that are happening that you don't always have to see in order to initiate your attacks and things like that, or have initiative checks or perception checks. It is an incredible system that is all happening beneath the system. There are obviously times where you need to do certain checks and the dice is thrown for you in front of you. And let me tell you, there is nothing more satisfying than seeing that natural 20. I love it. It is so great. However, it is something that I can see a lot of people not coming to terms with. It is definitely a different take on not only just gameplay, but also turn-based gameplay. It's not like your JRPGs where each player has a specific turn and you can then, I don't know, attack like Final Fantasy or Persona 4 is the best one that I can think of. Even Pokemon, it's nothing like that. It is so much more tactical and so much more in-depth than that. You specifically choose where your character places, and you have to then, from that placement, decide what you want to do with them. If you're not close enough to an enemy, you can't land a melee attack. If you're too close to an enemy with a ranged attacker, it does less damage, or it might not even hit because they're close enough to, I don't know, move out of the way. It is an incredibly in-depth combat system that I implore you to give at least 15 hours to. It is so difficult or so easy for those first 15 hours to say this is not for me, and those first 15 hours are incredibly challenging. The Goblin Camp, wow, I spent way too much time there, and it was always crushing to see my characters not make it through that. But once you start getting to terms and learning that combat system, it is truly something that I can't explain, because when it all flows together, and once you have your party set up perfectly to do different types of damage and different types of support, it works seamlessly, which is just insane to think, because if you saw how many things were going on the screen at once, to think that it works so seamlessly, Larian, you have done a magnificent job here. While yes, it might not be for everyone, it is definitely something that I've come to love a lot more. So what do I think? What is my final take on Baldur's Gate 3? Was it worth me waiting and picking up this massive deluxe edition, even though it probably just costs the same as a normal standard edition? But was it worth the wait? Was it worth everything that has been said? Is it worth that hype? Is the hype around it correct? And that's a difficult question to answer, because it depends on whether or not you like the type of gameplay and the type of narrative that is being built in Baldur's Gate 3. Because Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have just one narrative, and that replayability, in terms of money, I don't think there's many games that come close to how good Baldur's Gate is in terms of value for money, because you have so many opportunities. This isn't going to be a game that you one and done, and maybe you do one and done it, but I guarantee you're going to want to come back and build your next character and go through a different type of gameplay and a different type of narrative that you've formed. So in terms of value for money, there's few things like it. But what about the type of gamer that you are? What about if you are someone that only likes action adventures, open world games? It's then a more difficult sell for me, and it's because of that reason that while in general I love RPGs, it's difficult for me to give this another 10 out of 10, and it's difficult for me to say that this is one of the best games of all time, when for me it really is one of those best games of all time. But I can't make that decision for you. But go look at some gameplay, look at what is happening on the screen now. Tell me, or tell yourself, is that something you are going to genuinely enjoy? Or maybe you are looking for a new thing, maybe you are looking for a new challenge, in which case this is definitely that. And even if you don't like the combat too much, put that difficulty right down. Put it right down to the lowest and enjoy the different story paths, because the story paths are something that truly shine throughout this entire game. And the characters, I mean, wow, they're the ones that I keep coming back to, and they are the thing that I keep coming back to. The characters are the shining light and the guiding beacon between what happens in this story, because the main story, while yes, okay, cool, I've been infected with an illithid, it's great, it is what it is. I want to get rid of this thing in my head, I want to not be a mind flayer at the end of the game. Fantastic, whatever, I get that. But it's those side characters, it's the side characters that keep you so much more engaged in everything that is occurring in the world, because the world is beautifully crafted. While yes, sometimes it can feel a bit mundane, but it's just not. There's so much that you can explore, that if you take the time to explore every area to its fullest, you will experience a game that has been so lovingly made by developers that every RPG fan should at least try it. At least give it a try. If you have PlayStation Plus, do that 3-hour trial. I can guarantee you that 3-hour trial is not enough to get you fully in love with the game, but it might show you that it is not as daunting as it might have to be or might seem to be. And you could even spend that whole 3 hours just doing your character creation, because I know for myself I took a good long time for that character creation. And once I was settled on a character, I loved him and he was great. But about 20-30 hours in, I was already thinking about the next one, and I still am, and I can't pick one for the next one. So maybe one day I will get back into it and I'll do a different character. I can see myself going and creating another few characters that I want to do different gameplays or different playthroughs with, and that will be an amazing experience on its own, just creating those characters ready for those next playthroughs. But guys, if you have played Baldur's Gate 3, let me know what you think in the comments below. How long did it take you? Because I think I took a decent amount of time. I think maybe I took a little bit longer than I initially intended, but it was a great experience, and I can't wait for you guys to experience it for yourselves and tell me what you thought about it. It is difficult to play on PlayStation, so PC might be the best way to play. However, what I will say is if you are more comfortable with the controller adaptation for this game is fantastic. You don't have to worry about pointing and clicking to move everywhere. If you want to, you can, but having the ability to just roam freely with the thumbsticks like you would do in a normal action adventure is an amazing touch that Larian added. And I don't think if it was turn-based the entire way I would have gotten as far as I did, because I think it would have been a little bit too tedious on a PlayStation system. But guys, thank you so much for watching the video, and I will check you soon.